Welcome to another spine-chilling episode of Chilling Fireside Stories. Tonight, we're embarking on a terrifying journey to a place shrouded in darkness, tragedy, and ghostly tales, Poveglia Island. But before we dive into the horrors of this infamous place, I want to remind you how much your support means to me. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this video. Your encouragement helps keep these eerie stories coming, and I appreciate each and every one of you for sticking with me. Please be aware that this content might be upsetting to some viewers. If you are sensitive to graphic descriptions or disturbing stories, this video might not be for you. Now grab a warm drink, cozy up by the fire, and if you dare, join me as we unravel the dark history of Italy's most cursed isle, Poveglia Island. Poveglia Island is a small, crescent-shaped island situated in the Venetian lagoon between Venice and Lido in northern Italy. It spans just under 18 acres with its flat, swampy landscape surrounded by the calm waters of the Adriatic Sea. Despite its modest size, the island's history is anything but ordinary. Poveglia's geographical location places it close enough to Venice for the lights and sounds of the famous city to be faintly perceived, yet far enough away to feel isolated and abandoned. Its shores are lined with crumbling, overgrown buildings, remnants of its once thriving past, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Dense vegetation has engulfed much of the island, with tall trees and wild vines creeping over the ruins, giving it an eerie and foreboding atmosphere. Poveglia Island is notorious for its dark past. Used as a quarantine station during the Black Plague and later as a mental asylum, it has earned its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the world. But beyond the ominous headlines lies a rich, tragic history. The island first appears in historical records in 421 AD, where it served as a refuge for people fleeing barbarian invasions. Over the centuries, it evolved into a strategic military outpost, but by the late 1700s, it took on a more sinister role, when it became a quarantine station for people infected with the plague. Reports from that era describe a horrifying reality. Poveglia became a final stop for those deemed too sick to recover. According to witness accounts, bodies would be stacked like firewood and burned in massive pits. Survivors from neighboring islands recall seeing smoke for days on end, the stench of death hanging over the lagoon. A Venetian fisherman, now in his 90s, shared in an interview how his ancestors refused to go near the island during these times, believing it had been cursed by the thousands of souls who perished there. In 1348, Venice, like much of Europe, was overwhelmed by the plague, which decimated the population. Poveglia was soon repurposed as a lazaretto, a quarantine station for the sick and dying. It became a place of horror, where those who showed the slightest symptoms of the plague were forcibly sent, often against their will. Once they arrived on the island, they were essentially left to die with minimal medical care and in horrifying conditions. The island's role as a plague quarantine site continued throughout subsequent plague outbreaks, with Poveglia serving as a key defense against the spread of disease in Venice. The island's isolation made it a convenient location to confine the sick, keeping the infected away from the city's population. Those who arrived at Poveglia were doomed. Reports suggest that entire ships full of plague victims were sent to the island, where their bodies were dumped into mass graves or burned in open pits. Thousands of people are believed to have perished on the island during this period, their remains mingling with the soil. Some say the island is made up of 50% human ash, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. During the 18th century, Venice continued to use Poveglia as a quarantine station to curb the spread of infectious diseases. The Venetian Republic established the island as a permanent quarantine center, making it one of several such islands in the lagoon. By the late 19th century, as diseases like the plague became less of a threat, Poveglia fell into disuse once again. The quarantine station was gradually abandoned, and the island was left desolate. The decaying buildings and overgrown vegetation transformed it into an eerie and desolate place. Stories of the island's haunted past started to circulate more widely, as locals began to believe that the spirits of those who had died there still roamed the island. In 1922, the island was repurposed yet again, this time as a mental asylum. The hospital's conditions were as grim as its history. Patients were subjected to inhumane treatments, and the asylum quickly gained a reputation for being a place where the mentally ill were not healed but rather tortured. Whispers of unethical medical practices haunted the island for decades. Witnesses from nearby islands reported hearing disturbing sounds coming from Poveglia at night. Screams, cries for help, and eerie laughter that echoed across the lagoon. In 1968, a nurse who worked at the asylum broke her silence, recounting horrifying details of how patients were tied to their beds and subjected to crude lobotomies. The doctor performed procedures without anesthesia, she said in a chilling statement. It was as if the patients were merely test subjects, forgotten by society. Many believe the spirits of these tortured souls still roam the island today. The asylum's lead physician was said to have conducted bizarre experiments on his patients. The doctor at the infamous psychiatric hospital on Poveglia Island is a central figure in its dark and haunted legacy. Although there is little documented evidence identifying him by name, local legends and stories describe a sadistic doctor who performed horrifying experiments on the patients during the 1920s and 1930s. According to the legends, the doctor conducted lobotomies and other gruesome procedures without anesthesia, subjecting his patients to excruciating pain. He believed that through these brutal methods he could cure mental illness. Instead, he left many of his patients permanently damaged, both physically and psychologically. His favorite spot for these procedures was said to be the hospital's bell tower, which still looms over the island to this day. It is believed that many patients were taken to the tower and subjected to gruesome and unnecessary surgeries. The doctor's reign of terror on Poveglia eventually came to an end under mysterious circumstances. As the story goes, the doctor began to suffer from delusions, claiming that he was being haunted by the very spirits of the plague victims and the tortured souls of his patients. His mental state deteriorated rapidly, culminating in a dramatic and eerie end. One night, in a fit of madness, the doctor climbed to the top of the hospital's bell tower and threw himself off. Some accounts suggest he was pushed by unseen forces, perhaps the vengeful spirits of those he had tormented. Others believe it was a final act of desperation, a way to escape the torment of his own mind. The doctor did not die immediately from the fall. It is said that a nurse witnessed the fall and rushed to his side, only to find him alive but gravely injured. As he lay dying, the doctor allegedly whispered about the horrors he had seen, the ghosts that haunted him and the voices that had driven him to madness. He died a short while later and his body was buried on the island. The bell tower of Poveglia is one of the most iconic landmarks on the island and perhaps the most haunted. Although the bell itself was removed long ago, locals insist that the ghostly toll of the bell can still be heard echoing across the lagoon. Many believe that this tower acts as a portal between the living and the dead, where the spirits of those who perished on the island are trapped. In the years since the asylum's closure, several explorers and urban adventurers have ventured into the ruins of the bell tower. One such adventurer, a Venetian local named Antonio, described his experience in chilling detail. "The moment I entered the tower, I felt something cold brush past me," Antonio recalled. "There was no wind, but I heard what sounded like a distant scream, faint but unmistakable." Antonio also claims to have seen strange markings on the walls, symbols that he said looked ancient and occult-like, as if someone had once tried to summon or contain the spirits. Others who have visited the tower reported similar encounters, with many leaving the island convinced they had encountered something dark and malevolent. Over the years, Poveglia Island has been closed to the public, with the government of Italy strictly prohibiting anyone from setting foot on its shores. However, that hasn't stopped adventurers and thrill-seekers from attempting to explore the island. Many who have done so claim they were chased away by an unseen force, while others were never heard from again. A particularly unsettling story involves a group of 4 friends from Milan who snuck onto the island in the early 2000s. The friends rented a small boat and sailed towards the infamous island, despite local warnings about its cursed history and the Italian government's prohibition on visiting the site. Their plan was to spend the night on the island, exploring the ruins of the old plague quarantine buildings and the abandoned psychiatric hospital. According to the only survivor of the group, they spent hours exploring the ruins of the asylum before strange things began to happen. "We heard footsteps in the hallways behind us," But every time we turned around there was no one there, he recounted. One of the women reportedly felt as though she was being watched and claimed to have seen shadowy figures darting through the corridors. The group initially dismissed these as tricks of the mind, spurred by the island's reputation and their own heightened anxiety. Another woman suddenly felt a sharp, unseen force hit her in the back, knocking her to the ground. She screamed in pain, and when her friends rushed to help her, they were shocked to see deep scratches running down her back. Panicking, the friends decided to cut their adventure short and flee the island immediately. They sprinted back to their boat, but their ordeal was far from over. As they sailed away from the island, the atmosphere became even more oppressive. One of the men began feeling nauseous, and another woman claimed to hear faint, ghostly voices calling her name from the direction of the island. The group barely spoke, each lost in their own terror as they tried to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Poveglia. When they finally reached the mainland, they swore never to return. One of the women, the same who had been scratched, later reported recurring nightmares in which she relived the moment of her attack. She described seeing dark, shadowy figures standing at the foot of her bed, silently watching her. The friends also claimed that strange occurrences followed them even after they left the island. Unexplained knocks on doors, objects moving on their own, and the lingering feeling of being watched. After their horrifying experience, the group shared their story with a local newspaper but refused to give their full names, citing fear of ridicule and, more importantly, fear of the island's curse following them. Another local fisherman recounted how, on stormy nights, he would see strange lights flickering across the island, even though it had long been abandoned. "No one is supposed to be there," he said, "but I swear I've seen shadows moving as if people are walking around." In 2011, a well-known psychic named Sylvia Massey visited Poveglia with a team of paranormal researchers. Upon stepping onto the island, Sylvia described feeling an overwhelming wave of sadness and anger. "It was as if I could hear hundreds of voices crying out at once," she said. During her exploration of the asylum's ruins, she claimed to have made contact with the spirit of a young woman who had died during the plague. Sylvia reported that the spirit was confused and angry, still searching for her family after centuries of torment. She didn't understand what had happened to her, Sylvia explained. She kept repeating, "Where is my mother? Where is my father?" It was heartbreaking. Another psychic, Christian D'Angelo, who visited the island in 2018, described a much darker encounter. While investigating the bell tower, Christian claimed to have felt a powerful presence that was unlike any spirit he had encountered before. "It wasn't human," he said. "I don't know what it was, but it felt ancient and evil." Christian also reported hearing a deep, growling voice coming from the shadows, which warned him to leave immediately. His team captured strange electromagnetic fluctuations on their equipment, and several investigators experienced sudden nausea and dizziness. "Something on that island doesn't want people there," Christian concluded, "and it will do whatever it takes to drive you away." As our journey to the hauntingly mysterious Poveglia Island comes to an end, one can't help but feel a lingering chill from the tales of madness, torment, and death that have echoed through its abandoned ruins. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, Poveglia stands as a symbol of human suffering and an eternal reminder of the dark history that lies buried beneath its grounds. The stories may have faded over the centuries, but the restless spirits, they say, still wander the desolate paths, searching for peace that may never come. Perhaps the island's isolation has only heightened its eerie reputation. A place where the horrors of the plague and the atrocities of a mad doctor collide with the unknown, making Poveglia a place best left untouched for now. If you enjoyed this chilling story and want to hear more tales of haunted places and unsolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe to Chilling Fireside Stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Share this video with friends who love a good scare. And let me know in the comments if you dare set foot on Poveglia Island. And as always, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we tell ourselves.